What's up, everyone? I'm back. It's been a little while, maybe like over a week since I did the last video. Not a million percent right now. I'm definitely coming down with a little something. You're gonna hear me clearing my throat a little bit, a little phlegmy, drinking tea. Got this shit on my lip. Let's call it a zit. Let's stipulate that it's not herpes, just so I can do this with dignity. I don't think it is. In any case, even with my charisma at 85%, I think this will still be quality content. So yeah, the theme of today is medieval music. Medieval music really is my black metal, in that it's this thing I've been into for years, long before it was cool, because it was never cool, it's probably never going to be cool, and it's just cult. Medieval music is just cult, man. It just never seems to get trendy or gentrified. Yet it's something that if you bring it up, everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, like no one has a problem with it. It's not like cringe or lame to anyone. But yeah, I want to explain. I'm gonna explain why it's my black metal. I want to explain why it's awesome on a general cultural level. Then I'm going to talk about why it's awesome on an aesthetic level. And then I'm going to get really nerdy and talk about some actual nuts and bolts musical, music theory aspects. So yeah. So first of all, I mean, the thing that makes it sort of like black metal is that it's this whole realm that if you don't know about it and you haven't checked it out a lot, it all just sounds totally the same. You know, it's like jazz in that regard. Like, if you're not about it, it's just, everything sounds the same. It's like, who gives a shit? Then you get into it, and there's all these little details about why you like one guy more than the other, and the different little phases and influence. So it's like that, in a way. And just also, the vinyl is so cheap, dude. Medieval music vinyl, like, if you go to a place, they're just giving it away. It's like 50 cents for like box sets of like 14th century French music. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So I mean, it's not a reason to get into something, but if you're into it, it's a plus. And so I mean, this is on a vibe level. One of the things that I find so deep about medieval music is this sense of humility. There's this solemn humility to it. It feels like mankind is not this supreme, dignified being, this subject going out and just acting upon the world. It feels very feels like man is like abased in the face of these greater forces, you know, like in the face of God. It's very solemn, you know. It sounds like the Middle Ages. I mean, it sounds like what we historically think of with that. And you know what I say medieval music. I'm also including Renaissance music, especially early Renaissance, in there. Pre-Baroque European music. This is a thing, when you get into Baroque music, it gets to this, it starts to feel like highly reasonable. It really sounds like the scientific revolution. It sounds like proud composers crafting reasonable music that depicts a cosmos that all makes sense. Then you get into like Mozart and Beethoven. It really sounds like people with their emotions and their wit and their unique perspectives and whatnot. Medieval music is humble and mysterious by comparison, and so this is like on the vibe level what I love about it. On a straight up aesthetic level, the first thing that drew me into medieval music is the fact that it's beautiful in the sense that it's, I mean, pretty is too light a word for it, but it's beautiful without being, for lack of a better word, catchy. I mean, there's really not from a from a classical music standpoint, or from a pop music standpoint, or from any kind of contemporary music standpoint, there's not a lot to latch on to, you know? So it almost comes off as like beautiful ambient music when you first listen to it, because it's just this floating realm. But it's not just a floating realm. There's tons of, I mean, it's all based on hyper intricate melodic and harmonic intrigue. I mean, it's super, super wrought, you know? But it doesn't come off as like fussy or high tech, because to contemporary ears, it's almost meandering. It almost has this aimless kind of like, yeah, it's beautiful in general, but where's the tune? Like, where is it going? And you can kind of make out these little melodic little fragments, but they're not like lined up. So, I mean, that's really what drew me in. It just this sense of beauty without what we would call beauty without what registers as coherence in a melodic sense. All right. So let me just play you a little bit of Josquin de Prez. This is the Missa Pange Lingua. This is from what is this? This is like it's like the very beginning of the 15th century, I think. So this is kind of like medieval, this is like early Renaissance, late medieval, like very early Renaissance. Check this out. Yeah, it's just the deepest. It's just deep, right? But you hear how there's melodic stuff happening, but it's just kind of a mess to modern ears. It's just super fluid in that way. Yeah, so that's there's this sense of like similitude, like everything's glued together by this sort of self-similar enfolding. But without clear differentiation between blocks of stuff. All right, so that's like aesthetic vibes, and now we're gonna get into the even more nerded out music theory side of why. One of the reasons why I'm so into medieval music and Renaissance music. Okay, so check it out. Check out. This is also from the Missa Pange Lingua by Josquin de Prez. This is also from that, but this is the very beginning, where this is just the monophonic part, right? Monophonic is one voice. What we just listened to is polyphonic, right? Many voices. I'm kind of gearing this at people who kind of know about music theory, but not like a ton, and people who are into weird music enough that you would get this far in the video and actually kind of still be checking it out, right? So let's check out the monophonic part, right? Just one voice, just a melody, right? Check it out. Right, so check out, okay, so that melody, it's not really that memorable, right? I mean, it's beautiful, it's hypnotic, but could you sing that right back? Like, no, it's not catchy. Like, if you play the beginning of a Mozart sonata, you've got like a tune in your head. That's like an earworm. Even Bach or like Baroque music, I mean, it's more like a stream of self-similar material, but like you can latch on to these little like da 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 da. I mean, you can like latch onto that shit. This is like it's yeah, like I said, it's beautiful, but it's hard to latch on to what it is. And part of what that is, and this is where I started to really get deep on it, is it's music in that time period apparently was a lot of the composers, they had this ideal, what they called varietas, which just means variety, but it's like what they mean specifically by variety is that in melodies it was considered beautiful, like to be asymmetrical. So it's like asymmetrical yet balanced, right? All melodies that we're into now, and not all, but like, most melodic stuff that people like in contemporary music, pop music, and going into classical music, people like symmetry, like a little phrase, and then another phrase that's kind of different, and then the same phrase again, a little bit different, and like, so you see this sort of like the same, different, the same, different. It's like blocks. Varietas means you've got these long gestures going that balance each other out. So like if you go up, then it's like, oh, you got to resolve it going down. And then if you go down, you got to kind of resolve it going up. And then you want to stay in the same area for a little long. And then you want a big leap up. And then you want to come down. And it's like that whole thing is like this balanced, like gesture, kind of, that you wouldn't really subdivide into little sections. It's kind of like one beautiful thing, right? So that's that beginning, and it's like the rising and falling is very important. Da na 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 na. Like it's so sick to me because like back in those times, I mean a little bit I'm projecting onto what it was like in the Middle Ages, obviously, but I mean, what people say is like, in those times, people were so much more sensitive to just stimuli in general, and you wouldn't even hear music that often, right? You would only hear it like in church, or like you might hear instruments at some tavern or whatever, but you weren't just hearing music constantly. So it's like, I would imagine that like in those days, it's like if you had a melody that like leapt up by like a bunch, you'd be like, that would like get your blood pressure almost up, like, oh shit, like that better go back down, and then it like starts to creep back down, and you're like, all right, like I mean, this is why this stuff comes from Gregorian chant or Roman chant or Milanese chant, like these monophonic parts of the music of the Middle Ages. These monophonic parts come from much earlier, when everything was pretty much just one voice, like chants and stuff. But, so yeah, it's that thing with varietas. And, like, I haven't, in my own stuff, that's been a big influence on me at different times. Recent years, I haven't been on the varietas tip, I've been on this way more pop music tip, rock vibes. Things are pretty symmetrical. Things might be a little weird, but Psalm Zero, Nothing Human, even the solo record, the Simple Answers record, a lot of that is... it's pretty symmetrical stuff. But back with Extra Life, with those long melismas and all that stuff, is very like varietas-oriented. Things just balancing themselves out. So this is a big thing of what I'm into about it. And so just to finish off with some really like sort of line of flight, pardon me, on a philosophical tip that I'm not completely prepared to really go down, but I just want to open it up because I've heard people draw this comparison, that the time period when this very symmetrical kind of melodic writing, when things went away from varietas and became more into like symmetry, the time when that happens is considered to be sort of like the 17th-ish century, with like Baroque music, and I've heard people talk about how that shift in aesthetics is parallel to the rise of transnational capitalism, in the sense that capitalism is a grid-like logic of exchange, equivalences and exchange on a purely quantitative level, and that the whole thing with symmetry And with tonality, the Western tonal system that comes into play in the 17th century, or 18th really, but that whole thing is based on exchange, like taking a phrase and then moving it someplace, moving it to another key, taking it and changing it in an obvious way so it goes to like a different square. And it's like this sort of square, like grid, like a concept of music that has a sort of symmetry to it that kind of parallels this rise of the bourgeois class and capitalism, as a just governing force of how everything works. Whereas, and I've heard it, and I've also heard it kind of compared that this switch from varietas to more symmetry and exchange also kind of parallels the rise of scientific method, scientific revolution, in the sense that when it comes to scientific method, truth is constructed in knowledge is constructed in terms of a grid of identity versus difference. Like, is this the same as this? No. If it's different, how different is it? Let's create a grid of degrees of difference in that way. Whereas in the Middle Ages, maybe the way knowledge was constructed was more in terms of things looking similar to each other and being like, oh, the brain and the walnut are similar because they look similar, so therefore we're going to use some kind of prophecy and imagination and augury and like all this kind of, everything's all smeared together in this weird web of similitudes and stuff in the Middle Ages. I'm kind of doing like a butchering of Foucault when I talk about this from the Order of Things, which is one of my favorite Foucault books. So this sort of little meandering line of flight that I just drew is kind of based on Foucault, kind of based on Jacques Attali, his book Noise. That's a really sick book, Jacques Attali. It's called Noise, A Political Economy of Music. It's fire. So anyway, that's getting onto some really technical shit and then getting the technical back to this like larger philosophical stuff with history. But just to bring it back around, even if you weren't into most of this, check out medieval music, particularly Josquin de Prez. Again, that's early Renaissance, but as far as I'm concerned, late medieval and early Renaissance are kind of part of the same realm that I love. So yeah, thanks for listening. More esotericism coming at you in the near future. Peace.